The key turned with a clean click. I stepped inside and felt the stillness breathe around me. Unfurnished walls, scuffed hardwood floors, and sunlight stretching long across the hallway. It smelled faintly of dust and pine cleaner. Not luxury, not permanence. But it was mine. I had signed the lease 3 days ago, paid the deposit in full, and hauled everything I owned in 2 carloads. A futon, a small dining table, 4 mismatched plates, and a thrifted lamp with a crooked shade. No one helped me move. I hadn't asked. I was setting down a box of utensils when I heard the engines. 2 vehicles pulled up. First, my dad's black SUV. Then, Emily's minivan sagging slightly under the weight of car seats and plastic bags. Doors opened like an unfolding threat. My father first arms crossed Emily behind him, wrangling her twins, and Michael shuffling out last with a diaper bag. No one had texted. No one had called, but they were here on my sidewalk like this was a planned delivery. I didn't open the door right away. When I finally did, my dad didn't say hello. He looked behind me, past me into the apartment like appraising a hotel suite. His brow creased. "Where are we supposed to sleep?" Emily hovered behind him, biting her lip. One of the kids asked if there was a bunk bed. I kept my hand on the knob. "You're not?" He squinted. "What? You're not sleeping here?" I said clearly. "This place isn't for you." My dad's expression didn't change. It hardened. "You're saying we came all this way for nothing?" "I didn't ask you to come." Emily stepped forward, voice brittle. "The kids were so excited, Charlotte. They picked out spots for their sleeping bags." "I understand," I said, "but this is my apartment. It's not a family space." It never was. There was a pause, long, heavy, the kind that used to scare me into backing down, but not this time. I stood in that doorway, feet planted, and then, without raising my voice, I added, "You don't live here. You don't sleep here. You don't decide this time." I closed the door, not with force, but finality. Behind it. For the first time in years, I exhaled without guilt. I used to think it was normal to pack up your things every time company came. In our old house in Phoenix, my room doubled as a guest space storage overflow, or on some weekends, a quiet room for Emily's babies to nap. I learned early how to make myself small, how to roll up my mattress pad and tuck it behind the laundry shelf without making noise. I slept on the living room carpet more times than I can count. My dad said it built character. My mom said I was the easy one. Emily was never asked to move. She was younger by 3 years, but you wouldn't have known it by the way our parents orbited her. Every need was urgent. Every setback was a crisis. If she cried, the whole house hushed. If I succeeded, the house kept chewing. I remember once 7th grade, I won 2nd place in the regional science fair. I came home carrying a certificate and a $75 bookstore gift card. My dad barely looked up from his football game. Emily had a sore throat that day, and the mood in the house was delicate. Later that night, I overheard Mom whispering Emily's just more sensitive. Charlotte doesn't need all that fuss, so I stopped expecting the fuss. I learned to celebrate alone, quietly in the back row, with a kind of dignity no one else seemed to recognize. I worked through high school bagging groceries after class, not because I had to, but because I wanted to save for college. I opened a separate account at a credit union and labeled it O Fund for Arizona State University. Every time I skipped a coffee or took an extra shift, I imagined my future in a city where no one would ask me to give up my bed. When the acceptance letter came, I held it in shaking hands. Interior design, full admission. I told Mom, who was stirring something on the stove, and she said, "Oh, that's cute, but Emily's going through a tough time right now. Can you help her find a daycare this weekend?" I nodded. Of course. 2 months before my move, I called the bank to confirm my account balance. The woman on the line cleared her throat awkwardly and said, "It was withdrawn last week, all of it, signed by a joint account holder, Patricia Hayes." The air went out of me. When I asked my mother, she sounded annoyed. Emily's lease fell through. She and the baby had nowhere to go. "You're still going to school, aren't you?" I was, but I took out a loan with interest that same week and never mentioned it again. In their eyes, I had a future. Emily had emergencies, and I was the bridge between them. Always bending, always giving, until one day, I didn't. College didn't break me, but it tried. I learned how to make one pack of ramen last 2 meals, sometimes 3 if I skipped the flavor packet and added hot sauce from the campus cafe. I worked mornings at the library stamping return dates and fixing the broken spine of donated books. At night, I packed floral centerpieces at a shop 2 bus routes away. By the time I crawled into bed, it wasn't sleep I craved. It was stillness, the kind where no one asked me for anything. My professor said I was precise, disciplined a natural. I said thank you and smiled, then ran spreadsheets until midnight trying to stretch $32 across 5 days. Emily, meanwhile, was back in Phoenix posting pictures of latte art and baby milestones. She dropped out of her nursing program midway through her 2nd year. Too much stress, she said, but still managed to land a part-time admin job at a clinic through one of Dad's old contacts. For her 24th birthday, my parents surprised her with a used Toyota Corolla. "It's time she had some independence," Mom said. I got the news via group text. The same week, I walked 4 miles in the rain to avoid another overdraft fee on my transit card. I didn't complain, not out loud. I told myself it was fine, temporary, character building. But then came the message that knocked something loose. I had just submitted my final project for Studio Design 3. It was in the morning, and I was sitting on the back stairwell outside my apartment, cooling off from a panic attack I hadn't named yet. My phone buzzed. "Mom, we covered Emily's daycare this month. Used that savings account you never touch. Figured you wouldn't mind." There was no question, no heads up, just assumption. My emergency fund built from canceled haircuts, skipped lunches, and missed outings gone. Just like that. I stared at the message until my vision blurred. No tears, just a slow, suffocating pressure down on my chest like a weight I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Instead, I curled up on the stairwell with my knees pulled to my chest and let the quiet swallow me. They didn't hate me. That was the hardest part. They loved me, I think, in the way people love tools. Useful, durable, built to carry weight, and I had carried it. For years, I convinced myself it was noble, that I was the strong one, that maybe love looked different when it was quiet, when it didn't come with praise or protection. But in that stairwell beneath the buzzing hallway light, I finally let myself wonder, what if it was never love at all? That night, I started looking for internships in other cities. I toured 23 units before I said yes. Some were too dim, too cold, too much carpet. Others came with peeling cabinets or landlords who smiled too quickly. But then I stepped into the 1-bedroom on Elm Street, a 2nd-floor walk-up with sunlight pooling on the floor like it had been waiting for me. It smelled faintly of citrus and old paint. The windows opened easily. There was a heater that ticked when it warmed up and a creaky floorboard just past the kitchen archway. It wasn't beautiful, but it felt honest. I didn't need a dream home. I needed enough space to exhale. The lease was straightforward. I read every line twice signed in blue ink and transferred the deposit from my home fund spreadsheet with a steady hand. When the keys dropped into my palm, it felt like being handed permission. I moved in slowly. No trucks, no help, just a rolling suitcase and 2 borrowed plastic bins. I brought in my books first, then my plants, then a folding chair. I placed everything with intention, even the silence. For 2 weeks, I told no one. I walked to work, brewed coffee in the mornings, watched light shift across the walls in the evening. I wasn't hiding. It just hadn't occurred to me that I needed to explain. Then one Saturday, I sent a text to the family group chat. "Saturday, come see my place." The response was immediate. "Emily, are we bringing an air mattress or are there enough beds?" "Mom, how exciting. We'll grab lunch on the way. The kids are thrilled. Dad, send the lease papers. I want to take a look before we move forward." I stared at the screen. I hadn't said we. I hadn't offered anything beyond a glimpse, but their assumptions slid in easily like a hand into an old glove. Of course, I'd made space for them. Of course, they'd already packed. I closed my phone and placed it upside down on the counter. That evening, I opened every window and let the air in until the whole apartment smelled like rosemary and something sharp, something clean. I stood in the center of the room barefoot, listening to the walls breathe. If I'd said nothing, they might have stayed away. If I'd said more, they might have asked permission. But silence, I was learning, didn't protect you. Sometimes it just gave other people more room to assume you'd never say no. I poured a glass of water, sat in my folding chair, and waited for the knock I already knew was coming. They arrived just late enough to feel intentional. Dad walked in first without knocking, brushing past me like he was inspecting a property he'd already closed on. Emily followed, balancing a diaper bag and a tote filled with coloring books. Michael lingered outside, and the kids poured in like it was their new playground, jumping from one corner of the living room to the other, yelling about who got the window side. I said nothing, just moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and waited. Emily set a manila folder on the table. "We wanted to show you this in person," she said. Her voice was light practiced. "It'll make more sense once you see it." Dad opened the folder with a tap of his knuckle like it was a poker hand he knew would win. Inside mortgage documents, property listings, a color printout of a large house with a wraparound porch and 5 bedrooms. One of the pages had notes scribbled on it. Emily and Michael Master Suite. Kids upstairs. Charlotte office. Our guest room. This is the one Dad said. South Park, new development, just minutes from Emily's work in a great school district. "I didn't agree to this," I said quietly. He looked up, eyes sharp. "You didn't say no. I didn't say yes either." Emily leaned in. "We already put down $2,000 to hold it through Mom's account. The bank just needs a primary borrower. Your credit's the cleanest." I stared at her. "So, you planned a family mortgage using my name?" "I'll contribute what I can," she offered too quickly. "Maybe $3,400 a month." Once Michael picks up more shifts, Dad crossed his arms. "You live alone. No dependents. This is a chance to build something together." I didn't raise my voice. "I've been building something alone." He slammed his hand on the table. "Where are we supposed to sleep?" Then I stood up. "You don't. Not here." The room stilled. Even the children quieted. I gathered the folder, closed it, and placed it back in front of them. "If you want the house, buy it yourselves. But not with my name." Emily's face crumpled. Dad turned red. Michael finally stepped inside, but said nothing. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. Instead, I walked to the door, opened it, and waited. One by one, they filed out. No one said goodbye. The first message came. "Emily, you didn't have to embarrass us like that." The kids didn't understand. I didn't respond. By morning, another followed. "Dad, you're not family anymore. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've done." That one made me pause, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. I looked at the words for a long time, waiting for the familiar ache, the panic. Nothing came. Later that afternoon, my phone lit up with a call from Mom. I let it ring out the first time. She tried again, then again. On the 4th, I answered. Her voice was trembling the way it always did when she was just upset enough to seem fragile, but not enough to be kind. "Charlotte, your sister's devastated. Your father's blood pressure is up. Do you know what this is doing to our family?" I sat on the floor beside my bookshelf, her voice tinny in my ear. "You're tearing us apart over a few pieces of paper. You could have just signed and figured the rest out later. We always figure it out." "Not this time," I said. My voice was steady. "Calm," she sniffled. "I don't know what happened to you. You used to be so thoughtful." "I'm still thoughtful," I said. "Just not for people who only think of me when they need something." She went quiet. Then the line disconnected. I put the phone face down, stood up, and walked to the hardware store. $38 later, I returned with a new deadbolt and installed it myself. That night, I ordered Thai takeout yellow curry and jasmine rice and ate it sitting cross-legged on my living room floor. I didn't scroll. I didn't reply. Instead, I watched the streetlights blink on outside and felt the weight in my chest shift. Not vanish, just rearrange itself into something manageable, familiar. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't vindicated. But for the first time after one of their storms, I wasn't crumbling. I was intact, and I wasn't going anywhere. It had been nearly 4 months since the folder hit my table, and they walked out without looking back. I hadn't blocked anyone. I'd just stopped reaching out. Then one evening, just as the light was dipping past the window ledge, my phone buzzed. "Emily, I get it now. I'm sorry." No preamble, no questions, Just that. A second later, another message arrived. A photo of Ethan and Mia sitting cross-legged on a blanket paper, crowns on their heads, the baby asleep in Emily's lap. The room around them was cramped and dim, but there was warmth in it. Bare walls, mismatched mugs, a single bulb casting soft light. Real, unstaged. "We're in a rental for now," she wrote. "It's small, but peaceful." I stared at the photo longer than I expected to, not because of the kids, but because of her. There was something in her face, exhaustion, yes, but also a kind of clarity, like she'd stopped performing. 2 days later, she stood at my front door with a backpack, a car seat, and a quiet smile. She didn't bring an apology wrapped in ribbon. She didn't expect a tour. She just asked if we could sit. We talked on the porch while the kids chased shadows in the yard. Nothing deep, just how hard it is to buy groceries with rising prices, how daycare wait lists are a joke. She told me she was doing virtual admin work now. I nodded, handed her a glass of water. She didn't feel the silence, and I didn't force it. We weren't rivals anymore, just two women who had carried too much for too long. She didn't ask me to forget anything. I didn't need her to bleed. When Mrs. Thompson from downstairs brought up a tin of cookies. That evening, she handed it to me, glanced at Emily through the screen door, and said, "You look lighter with them here." After dinner, the kids fell asleep in a pile of blankets in the corner of the living room. Emily sat beside me with a mug of tea. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The next morning, they were still there. I repainted the living room a soft gray, the kind that shifts with the light. I did it slowly over a weekend, one wall at a time, a podcast humming in the background. When it dried, I stood back and felt something settle, a quiet that didn't need to be earned. The mint on the windowsill had finally taken. I clipped a few sprigs and tucked them into a jar by the sink. Every time I passed, the scent reminded me I had planted something and it hadn't died. My mom came by once in early spring. She stood at the door with a store-bought coffee cake and eyes that didn't carry fire or frost. "I'm not here to fix anything," she said. "I just thought you might let me sit for a while." I did. She complimented the curtains, asked about work. She didn't mention Emily, didn't bring up the house. When she left, she didn't say you should visit. She said, "I'm trying," and I believed her. A week later, I hosted dinner on the patio. Emily brought chicken and a bottle of ginger ale. The kids drew chalk rainbows on the concrete. Mrs. Thompson arrived with pickled green beans and her usual commentary on city construction. I invited Alex, a coworker who once gave me a ride home in the rain and never asked why I was crying in the passenger seat. We ate off mismatched plates. Someone spilled juice. Laughter rose, not loud, but easy. When the sun dipped, I passed around folded blankets. I didn't hover. I didn't explain anything. I just let it be. That night, as I rinsed dishes and heard Ethan giggling from the next room, I caught myself saying it aloud for the first time. "I'm glad they're here. I'm glad they're home." And I meant it. Not because they needed me, not because I was making space, but because I hadn't needed to shrink to let them. Through this journey, I've learned that true strength lies in drawing boundaries, not in endless sacrifice. For years, I diminished myself to keep the peace, but asserting my worth freed me from resentment. Family bonds thrive on mutual respect, not obligation. Now, I embrace relationships that uplift without demanding I shrink. It's okay to say no. It paves the way for genuine yeses. This clarity has brought me peace and deeper connections.
The Chin family Christmas dinner was always held at my parents' house in suburban Houston, a sprawling ranch-style home that my father had purchased after his engineering firm went public. Tonight, 47 relatives crowded around 3 tables arranged in the living room, the smell of roasted turkey mingling with my grandmother's famous dumplings. I sat at the far end of the secondary table, what my brother Michael had jokingly called the kids' table, even though I was 29 years old. Next to me were my teenage cousins scrolling through their phones and looking bored. "So, Rachel," Aunt Linda called from the main table, her voice cutting through the dinner conversation. "Your mother tells me you're still at that lab job?" I looked up from my plate. "Yes, I work at Johnson Space Center." "Doing what exactly?" Uncle Tom asked. He was a cardiac surgeon, and his tone suggested he already knew the answer would disappoint him. Research, I said simply. Entry-level lab work. Mom interjected, her voice tight with that particular blend of embarrassment and frustration I'd grown accustomed to. She's been there for 6 years now. No promotions, no advancement. Just staying in the same position. That's concerning, Aunt Linda said, frowning with exaggerated sympathy. Most people move up after a year or two. Have you considered that maybe research isn't your calling? I took a sip of water and said nothing. She has no ambition, Dad said, shaking his head. He'd been a successful engineer before starting his firm, and he expected his children to be equally driven. We raised her and Michael to be achievers. Michael's a VP at 32. Rachel is, well. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Michael, sitting at the head of the main table with his wife Jessica, jumped in with his usual blend of concern and condescension. Rach, seriously, have you thought about switching fields? Maybe tech? I could get you an interview at my company. We're always looking for project coordinators. It's not too late to start a real career. I have a career, I said quietly. Lab assistant isn't really a career, sweetie, Mom said. It's a job. There's a difference. My cousin Sarah, recently graduated with a business degree, leaned forward eagerly. What do you even do all day? Like mix chemicals and stuff. Something like that, I said. God, that sounds boring, she said not unkindly. Don't you want to do something more? I don't know, important. Uncle Tom set down his fork. Rachel, I'm going to be direct with you because I care about you. You're almost 30. You're unmarried, you're in a dead-end job, and you're wasting your potential. Your parents paid for an MIT education. Caltech, I corrected. Whatever, an expensive education, and you're essentially a lab technician. That's not what they invested in. We're just worried about you, Aunt Linda added. You're so smart. You could do so much more if you just applied yourself. I felt the familiar weight of their expectations pressing down on me. For 6 years I'd endured these conversations. For 6 years I'd let them believe whatever they wanted about my work because explaining the truth had become exhausting. The first year at NASA I tried to tell them about my research. About the projects I was leading. About the significance of the work. But every time I mentioned propulsion systems or orbital mechanics, their eyes glazed over. Every time I explained the complexity of what I did, they changed the subject to Michael's latest promotion or someone's wedding or literally anything else. So I'd stopped explaining. Let them think I was a lab assistant. Let them be disappointed. It was easier than fighting for recognition I'd never receive. Maybe you could go back to school, Jessica suggested. She was a marketing director and loved to solve problems. Get an MBA. That would open doors. I have a PhD, I said. Well, sure, but in what? Mom asked. Some specialized thing no one understands. That's the problem, Rachel. You're too focused on these niche subjects instead of building practical skills. Aerospace engineering and astrophysics aren't exactly niche, I said, keeping my voice level. They are if you're just working in a lab, Dad countered. Real aerospace engineers build things. Design rockets. Lead teams. You're just, what? Running experiments. Running tests on equipment, Michael said knowingly. Entry-level stuff. Trust me, Rach, I've hired enough researchers to know the difference between the people who lead and the people who assist. You're stuck in the assistant role. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. The real issue, Uncle Tom continued, warming to his topic, is that you lack career vision. You're comfortable being mediocre. You've settled. I haven't settled, I said quietly. Then what do you call 6 years in the same position? Aunt Linda asked. That's the definition of settling. My phone buzzed again. More insistent this time. She's always been like this, Mom said to the table at large as if I weren't sitting right there. Even as a child. Content to stay in the background. Never pushing herself. Michael was always the ambitious one. Remember when she turned down that job at Boeing? Dad added. They offered her a position in their commercial division. Real money. Real advancement potential. But she chose to stay at NASA doing lab work. That was foolish, Uncle Tom agreed. Boeing is a career maker. My phone was vibrating continuously now. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Priority alert. Is emergency. Immediate response required. Director authorization needed. My stomach dropped. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Rachel, where are you going? Mom asked, irritated. We're in the middle of dinner. I need to take this, I said, already moving toward the hallway. See? I heard Michael say behind me. This is what I mean. No boundaries. They call and she jumps. That's why she's stuck. I stepped into my father's home office and closed the door, already dialing the space station control center. Chin, I said the moment someone answered. Director Chin, thank God. The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, my deputy director and one of the best flight controllers in the program. He sounded stressed, which immediately put me on high alert. Marcus never got stressed. We have a critical situation on ISS. Primary life support system is failing. Carbon dioxide scrubbers are offline. We have maybe 6 hours before CO2 levels become lethal for the crew. My mind immediately shifted into crisis mode. Everything else, my family, their opinions, the dinner, vanished. Right now, 6 astronauts were in danger, and I was the only person authorized to make the decisions that would save them. Walk me through it, I said, already pulling up the secure NASA app on my phone. What triggered the failure? Electrical short in the primary environmental control system. We've got redundancy, but the backup system isn't kicking in. Engineering thinks it's a software issue, but they need authorization to push an emergency patch to the station's systems. That's a massive risk, I said. If the patch fails, we could lose all environmental controls. Aware. But if we don't try, the crew dies in 6 hours. I pulled up the technical specifications on my phone, my mind running through scenarios. What's the crew status? Awake and aware. Commander Mills is asking for you directly. Put me through. There was a brief pause, then a familiar voice crackled through. Rachel, we could use some good news up here. Commander Patricia Mills was on her 3rd ISS mission and one of the most experienced astronauts in the program. She was calm, professional, and very aware of how serious this situation was. Working on it, Pat, I said. I need you to run a manual diagnostic on the backup life support. Marcus thinks it's software, but I want to rule out hardware failure first. Copy that. Running diagnostic now. I opened my laptop, logged into the NASA Secure Network and pulled up the ISS systems dashboard. The data was concerning. CO2 levels were rising steadily. At current rates, they'd reach dangerous levels in 5.5 hours. Marcus, get me Dr. Okonkwo from Systems Engineering, I ordered. And wake up the entire mission control team. I don't care that it's Christmas. We need all hands. Already done. Dr. Okonkwo is standing by. A new voice came on the line. Director Chin, I have the emergency patch ready, but I need your authorization to upload. Not yet, I said. I want to understand the failure first. If we patch without knowing the root cause, we might make it worse. Agreed, but time is critical. 6 hours is an eternity in engineering time, I said. We're going to solve this right, not fast. Behind me, the office door opened. I held up a hand without turning around. Rachel, what on earth? Mom's voice. Not now, I said sharply. Don't you dare use that tone with. Mom, I have 6 astronauts who will die if I don't solve this problem. We'll talk later. I heard her sharp intake of breath, but I was already back in the call. Pat, what's the diagnostic showing? Hardware looks fine. All systems are nominal except the software interface. That confirms it, I said. Marcus, authorize Dr. Okonkwo to begin the patch upload, but I want it done in stages. We test each module before moving to the next. If anything fails, we roll back immediately. Understood. Beginning staged upload now. My family had followed Mom into the office. I could feel them crowding behind me, confused and curious, but I couldn't focus on them. On my laptop screen, I watched the data streams from the ISS in real time. CO2 levels, oxygen levels, temperature, pressure. Every number told a story, and right now the story was that we were in a race against time. First module uploaded successfully, Dr. Okonkwo reported. Running verification. Pat, any change? Negative. Backup systems still offline. Keep going, I said. Module 2. Rachel, Dad's voice behind me. What is happening? Working, I said tersely. Is this about your lab work? I almost laughed. Lab work. If only they knew. Module 2 uploaded, Dr. Okonkwo said. Verification in progress. This is Houston, Marcus's voice came through the speaker. We're showing anomalous readings on your backup environmental system. Stand by. Standing by, Commander Mills responded. I could hear the tension in her voice now. Module 2 verified, Dr. Okonkwo said. Moving to Module 3. This was the critical one. Module 3 controlled the interface between the backup system and the main life support controls. If it failed, we'd lose our chance to bring the backup online remotely. Upload in progress, Dr. Okonkwo said. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of my laptop and the crackle of the communications system. My family had stopped talking, sensing something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. Module 3 uploaded. Vivian. Complete. All systems green. Pat, try the backup now, I said. There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Then, Houston, we have backup environmental control online. CO2 scrubbers are active. We're seeing CO2 levels starting to drop. The tension in my shoulders released slightly. Marcus, confirm from your end. Confirmed. SS life support is stable. CO2 levels declining at expected rates. Oxygen production normal. We're good. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Excellent work, everyone. Pat, you're safe for now, but we need to figure out what caused the primary system failure. I want a full diagnostic and I want redundancies checked on every critical system. Copy that, Director. And Rachel, thanks for saving our lives. Again. That's what you pay me for. Houston out. I closed the connection and sat back in my father's office chair. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by exhaustion. Crisis management always left me drained. Behind me, absolute silence. I turned around slowly. My entire family was crowded in the doorway, staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning comprehension. Did she just say director? Michael asked quietly. I closed my laptop. I need to get to Johnson Space Center. The situation is stable, but I want to be in mission control for the full diagnostic. Rachel. Mom's voice was strange, shaky, uncertain. That person on the space station called you director. Yes. Director of what? I stood up, gathering my laptop and phone. Director of Human Spaceflight Operations at NASA. I oversee all crewed missions to the International Space Station, manage a team of 300 engineers and scientists, and hold ultimate authorization for any decisions related to crew safety. The silence was deafening. But you said you did lab work, Dad said weakly. No, I corrected gently. I said I work at Johnson Space Center. You said I did lab work. I stopped correcting you 4 years ago. 4 years ago? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. You've been the director for 4 years? 5 actually. I was appointed when I was 24. Youngest director in NASA's history. That's impossible, Uncle Tom said. They don't make 24-year-olds directors of. They do when that 24-year-old has a PhD in aerospace engineering and astrophysics from Caltech, has published groundbreaking research on propulsion systems, and spent 3 years designing the environmental control systems currently keeping astronauts alive, I said calmly. And when that person has proven themselves capable of leading complex missions and making life-or-death decisions under pressure. Michael's face had gone pale. The ISS. You're responsible for the International Space Station. Among other things, we're also developing the systems for the Artemis moon missions and the eventual Mars program. Mars, Sarah repeated faintly. When you turned down the Boeing job, Dad said slowly, you said you chose to stay at NASA? I turned down Boeing because I'd just been promoted to deputy director of the ISS program, I said. Taking a commercial position would have been a significant step backward in my career. But you never told us, Mom said. Why didn't you tell us? I picked up my coat. I tried. 5 years ago, I came to Christmas dinner excited to share that I'd been promoted to director. Before I could say anything, you started talking about how I needed to be more ambitious like Michael. You said I was wasting my potential in some lab somewhere. So I stopped trying to explain. We didn't know, Aunt Linda said weakly. You didn't ask, I replied. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject or made a dismissive comment. Every achievement I mentioned was minimized. Eventually, I realized you weren't interested in what I actually did. You just wanted me to fit your narrative of the disappointing daughter. That's not fair, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, I acknowledged. But it's how it felt. My phone buzzed. Marcus asking if I was coming in. I need to go, I said. There are 6 astronauts who need me to figure out why their life support failed so it never happens again. Rachel, wait, Dad said. We should talk about this. We will, I agreed. But not tonight. Tonight I have a job to do. I walked past them through the living room where the rest of the family was still seated at the dinner tables, watching with confusion and curiosity. Someone had turned on the TV and I could see CNN's breaking news banner. NASA crisis averted. ISS crew safe after emergency life support failure. Isn't that Rachel's work? I heard one cousin whisper. Apparently she's kind of a big deal at NASA, another replied. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Rachel. Mom called after me. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'm sorry, she said quietly. We're sorry. We should have listened. I nodded. Yes, you should have. But we can talk about that later. Right now, I have astronauts depending on me. The drive to Johnson Space Center took 20 minutes. By the time I arrived, the Mission Control Center was fully staffed despite it being Christmas evening. That was the thing about spaceflight. Emergencies didn't care about holidays. I walked into the control room and was immediately surrounded by my team. Director, the full diagnostic is complete, Marcus said, handing me a tablet. We've identified the root cause. It was a cascade failure triggered by a micrometeorite strike that damaged some external wiring. I scanned the report. Odds of another strike in the same location? Minimal, but we're recommending additional shielding on that section of the station. Approved. Get engineering started on the design. I want it ready to go up on the next resupply mission. Yes, ma'am. I spent the next 4 hours in mission control reviewing data, making decisions, coordinating with international partners. The ISS was a joint program with Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada, and ensuring that every possible contingency was addressed. Finally, around midnight, I was satisfied that the situation was under control. Marcus, you have the control room, I said. I'm heading home. Call me if anything changes. Will do, Director. And hey, nice work tonight. You saved their lives. We saved their lives, I corrected. This is a team effort. I drove back to my apartment, exhausted but satisfied. This was why I loved my job. The challenges, the problem solving, the knowledge that my decisions directly impacted human lives in the most dramatic way possible. When I got home, I found 63 text messages and 41 missed calls from various family members. I made tea, sat on my couch and started reading through them. Rachel, please call me. We need to talk. Michael. Holy shit, why didn't you tell me you were basically in charge of the space station? Dad, your mother showed me the NASA website. It says you're the director of human spaceflight operations. Is that true? Aunt Linda. Rachel, I saw the news. They're saying you saved the astronauts. I had no idea you did such important work. Sarah. OMG, Rachel, you're all over Twitter. Everyone is calling you a hero. Jessica. Rachel, we're so sorry. We had no idea. I set down my phone and closed my eyes. Part of me felt vindicated. They finally understood. They finally saw what I'd been trying to tell them for years. But another part of me felt sad. Because their respect shouldn't have required a televised emergency. They should have believed me when I told them my work mattered. They should have asked questions instead of making assumptions. My phone rang. I answered. Rachel, she said, and I could hear she'd been crying. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, I said quietly. I saw the news. They showed your picture. They talked about your education, your achievements, your age. They called you one of the most important people at NASA. I am one of the most important people at NASA, I said simply. That's not arrogance. It's just fact. Why didn't you make us listen? She asked. Why didn't you force us to understand? Because I shouldn't have to force my own family to respect me, I said. You should have wanted to understand. You should have been curious about my work, proud of my achievements, interested in my life. But you weren't. You were embarrassed by what you thought I was. We were wrong, she whispered. Yes, you were. Can you forgive us? I thought about that. I don't know yet. Maybe. But things need to change, Mom. You can't just be proud of me now because the world is paying attention. You need to be proud of me regardless of external validation. I want to be better, she said. We all want to be better. Then start by asking questions, I said. Real questions. About my work, my life, my goals. And then actually listen to the answers. I will, she promised. Rachel, I will. We talked for another hour. She asked about my job, about the astronauts, about the emergency. And for the first time in years, she actually listened to my answers without dismissing or minimizing them. It wasn't perfect. Years of hurt feelings wouldn't heal in one conversation. But it was a start. Epilogue. 3 months later, I stood at the podium of the National Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, delivering the keynote address on the future of human spaceflight. In the audience were aerospace engineers, astronauts, policymakers, and International Space Agency representatives. Also in the audience in the third row sat my entire family. Mom and Dad had flown out specifically for this. Michael had rearranged his schedule. Even Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda had made the trip. I talked about the challenges of keeping humans alive in space. About the delicate balance of life support systems. About the split-second decisions that meant the difference between success and catastrophe. About the Mars missions we were planning and the technologies we were developing. When I finished, the audience stood and applauded. But I only cared about the people in the third row who were clapping hardest of all. After the speech, Mom hugged me tightly. That was amazing, she said. You're amazing. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, I said. I mean it, she continued. Not because everyone here is telling me you're important, but because you're my daughter and you're brilliant and you're changing the world. I felt tears prick my eyes. That means a lot. Dad shook my hand, then pulled me into an uncharacteristic hug. We were fools, he said gruffly. Blind fools. We're going to do better. Michael introduced me to his colleagues who'd come to the conference. This is my sister, Dr. Rachel Chin. She's the director of human spaceflight operations at NASA. Basically the most impressive person I know. Even Uncle Tom approached sheepishly. Rachel, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. What you do is remarkable. Thank you, I said graciously. That evening, over dinner, my family asked me questions about my work. Real questions, thoughtful questions, questions that showed they'd actually been paying attention to my speech. How do you handle the stress? Sarah asked. Knowing that people's lives depend on your decisions? You prepare, I said. You train. You build systems and redundancies. And you trust your team. Do you ever get scared? Mom asked quietly. Every time we launch, I admitted. But that's part of the job. The fear keeps you sharp, keeps you from getting complacent. What's next for you? Michael asked. You're 29 and already at the top of your field. Where do you go from here? I smiled. Mars. In 10 years we're planning to send the first crewed mission to Mars. I want to be the director who makes that happen. You will, Dad said with absolute certainty. If anyone can do it, you can. Later, as we walked back to the hotel, Mom took my arm. Thank you for giving us another chance, she said. You're my family, I said simply. I want this to work. It will, she promised. We'll make it work. And standing there under the Colorado stars, thinking about the astronauts orbiting overhead and the Mars missions yet to come, I believed her. Sometimes people need to see you through others' eyes before they can truly see you themselves. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't fair. But it was human. And if my family could learn and grow and change, well, that was its own kind of rocket science. The kind that required patience, persistence, and the belief that even the most difficult trajectories could be corrected with the right calculations and enough determination. After all, I'd kept 6 astronauts alive in the vacuum of space. Surely I could navigate one complicated family.